It's about, going on adventure, seeing crazy stuff, and having epic stories that you can tell your friends.
Welcome to the Red Caps Podcast, a podcast where we dip our caps into the blood of our listeners and we ramble on about old school games. Today, I'm going to be sitting down with Brenden from Hammer City Games, which is an indie dev that's just down the highway from me here in Ontario, Canada. They have just launched a Kickstarter called Earth After Death. It closes on June 4th, 2024. So I wanted to kind of get this episode out as soon as possible so that people could jump on and go and support that Kickstarter if they like it. And it gives Brenden a chance to chat about the company, his thoughts on gaming, and like I said, get you hopefully interested in going and checking out the Kickstarter. So without too much more preamble, I hope you can sit back, listen, and enjoy. Hey folks, I am joined by Brenden from Hammer City Games. How you doing today, sir?
It's a Tuesday. It's been a week and a day.
It's a Tuesday in the middle of a Kickstarter week, so it's or a Kickstarter month, I should say. So it's probably stressful and tiring, and
it's about exactly a week since the Kickstarter launched. So yeah, it's a good litmus test point.
Yeah. Hammer City Games. I got tagged over to you guys by a friend of the show who was like, hey, here's another Canadian Kickstarter coming on. I'd like to hear more from them. You should reach out. I hadn't heard of Hammer City Games. How long have you guys been around, and how many of you are there? Is this a in-house, husband-wife deal, or have you guys started to spread out more from there?
I officially started doing legitimate, I guess, under a single name work in 2023. But it was about a month ago that I officially incorporated everything. Currently it's just me and some friends and my lovely wife, who is a phenomenal editor, as well as a good friend who's a content creator, DM, and also an editor. Lord knows I need two of them. I wanted to jump into the space. There's a myriad of reasons, but I just saw the landscape of RPG publishing, and it's fine, but it's also incredibly bottlenecked, I'd say. I mean, with Peregrine Coast Press, which is kind of collapsing from the inside out, and I have a history with Exalted Funeral I'm not too keen on, honestly. We could get into that another time, but I said, you know what? Whatever. Let's, throw everything to the wall. I'm down to, do the legwork to try and elevate Canadian voices and, actually give people a decent pay. And yeah, I wanted to do more than just make RPGs. I wanted to help other people that wanted to get into the space that have no idea what to do. I've done a lot of the legwork. I kind of know what to do, and I want to help other people who are just like, either they don't care to, or they're exhausted, or it's very opaque. Let's be honest. It's not an easy industry to swim through to understand how to market, produce, etc. So yeah, there's a lot of reasons, and it's real fresh. If you want this company as it exists now, it's about a month old.
So I've been to Hamilton a few times. Most of the time I'm driving right past through, but I've been out there for hockey games and for concerts and monster truck, and I've used that airport probably more times than I should, because that seems to be where every budget airline in Canada ends up. But mostly it's usually a fairly quick in and out. So I don't know a whole lot about the gaming scene in Hamilton. Do you guys have a decent selection of gaming stores, or is there much of a gaming scene in Hamilton, or is this something that you kind of grew into from other places and online type idea?
It's a little bit of both, honestly. Definitely online. I mean, the presence of Canadian RPGs is very just, it's Toronto, and then that's it, So you can imagine that the selection is about as narrow as you can imagine. But no, Hamilton has a great artsy scene, I will say. I mean, we have Art Crawl, we have Super Crawl, we have plenty of other little conventions or little events for artists who are holed up on James Street North or Ottawa Street. People who are trying their best to do interesting, cool things, not even in RPGs, but just art in general. And we actually have a fair few amount of our board game cafes, which cater to an RPG crowd. The one I run at, and I will definitely give a shout out to, is the Moncala Monk on Cannon Street East. Matt, who runs the place, is absolutely wonderful. He has a whole network of people who want to get into RPGs. He will, send them Google Forms to submit. He'll pair them up with DMs who want to, want to run games, and it's absolutely wonderful. He's been very supportive of me in, trying to get into the RPG scene. And there's also, there's a whole wargaming scene here with people going to Tista Minis or Black Knight Games to play Warhammer or Infinity or whatever have you. I think it's a great place to meet people who are interested in nerd culture, and I think me and my wife just moved to the right place to meet like-minded people.
So coming into the gaming space, starting up this company, does your day job or background before this feed into any of this at all? Or is this kind of, I had a whole separate thing that doesn't really relate, and I needed to kind of have a delineation, and now the gaming space is over here and whatever else was on the other side?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both, honestly. I'm trained as a chemist. I have a master's degree in organic chemistry, and I'm currently a nuclear chemist right now by trade. While I was doing my master's degree, I did write a couple novels and get them published. So that really gave me my first foot in the door when it came to the publishing scene. It was a very fascinating, if kind of depressing, almost dystopian look at it. 7% is not a great royalty cut. Let's be honest here. And then, after that, I think that was an excellent experience for understanding what it takes to market and the different, who you're marketing to, the, internal logistics that have to, be put down in order to get something out the door. After that, I was interested in making RPGs. I've played enough. I wanted to make some. I started with some smaller, just cobbled together micro games and mini games. And then a lot of research into, how to market, how to do a Kickstarter, how to distribute, how to print. It's a lot of trial and error in that regard, but I guess I have a leg up because I was in literature, I suppose. I don't know how much that helped me.
So yeah, I went looking through some of the stuff that you've done in the past. So like you mentioned the novels, so you've got the Walking Shadows series. I saw that there was like into the Zone zines, and then a previous Kickstarter that you had done, Graveyard of the Gods. And the one thing that kind of jumped out to me, especially when it comes to like tabletop RPGs, is that on pretty much everything I mentioned there, the genre changes, but they're all away from what kind of the mainstream RPG genre is, in that they're not, stereotypical medieval fantasy. They're all, you got noir, you got post-apocalyptic, you've got sci-fi.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Do you find it, when you decided you were going to get into making your own RPGs, was it a conscious decision to, hey, there's enough, medieval fantasy stuff that I'm going to stay away from that and I'm going to hit the other areas? Or was it just, no, this is what interests me more?
Both. I can't make a better RPG than Gygax and Arneson have with AD&D. If I have to play medieval fantasy, I'm not playing anything else. Like, it scratches an itch for me. I gotta be honest. But what makes me want to make, I guess, out of the genre, out of the norm RPGs is just, there are a lot of niches to fill when it comes to role-playing. Look at how Cyberpunk has its own niche, and then you have the Chronicles of Darkness games. Then you have, let's be honest, even Hyperborea, which is a BX retro clone, has its own niche of like completely separate from AD&D. Still medieval fantasy, but it's science fantasy. It's weird.
Yeah, sword and sorcery.
Exactly.
More so than the medieval.
With laser guns and shit like that. And so I guess it was mostly I just followed what I found was interesting and what I could run well. I don't make anything that I don't want to run. That's the most important thing. I know that there's so many RPG reviewers out there that they'll be like, oh, this book's cool, and then it's on the shelf. I have a list of games I own and a list of games I've played, and I don't want to keep treading over the same ones. I want to constantly bring new games to my table. I want to challenge myself, and I want to make something that I'm going to be passionate about running and telling people about.
Okay, so that leads in well. What's the elevator pitch? You and I are we walk up to a local GameStop, say hi, and you go, hey, I've got this Kickstarter going. What's the pitch for Earth After Death?
Do you miss when Fallout was good? Well, I got the game for you, dude. This is Fallout 1 and 2, but worse. Get ready.
It's interesting that you liken it to the Fallout series, like from a video game perspective. Because yeah, like there's definitely connections to things like Gamma World or
Hmm.
what have you on the role playing side. But I think especially in today's world with Fallout being big on the, I think is it Amazon that's doing that show? I
It is
think
Amazon. Yeah.
yeah, the Amazon show or what have you. So if we use Fallout as an example, what other media influences would you say there is in there?
Oh, there's a lot. I mean, Fallout, obviously, Wasteland, but that's kind of implied because Fallout's the spiritual successor to Wasteland. Thanks, Brian Fargo. We got Mad Max, we got A Boy and His Dog, we got I Am Legend, we got one of my favorite books, which is Swan Song by Robert McCammon. We got Caves of Cud, which really influenced it. Even AD&D, Gamma World, obviously. Um, there's a Doom mod called Ashes 2063, which is just absolute peak apocalyptic adventure, which I highly recommend. That a lot of those have, bits and pieces have all conglomerated together to really influence the shape of this RPG. I don't want it to be too much like, oh, it's just a copy of a Mad Max RPG. Oh, it's just Fallout on the tabletop. I want it to be weird. I want it to be fun, but I also want it to be eclectic enough that it's not just like going to be stuck in a single niche. That it's like, oh, but if I want a different kind of apocalypse, um, I don't want it to fall into like the. I also don't want it to fall into like the legacy hole, where legacy is so eclectic that you're like, what is this game even about? There's going to be a lot of people that are going to hate me for saying that, but
So if you had
I said it.
if you had to say like a set piece, like so, if I was to try to describe somebody who somehow lived under a rock and had never heard of Dungeons and Dragons or something to that effect, I could do a set piece of describing crawling through a dungeon or encountering some of the iconic monsters or what have you. What sort of a set piece, like, hey, this is the type of thing you're going to see or potentially see in this sort of a game?
Ooh, that's a good question. I got to think about that. I think the most okay. I think the most I suppose concrete vision I have is you're crawling along a subway tunnel, collapsed, or oh no, I have rules for a sewer dungeon. Horrifying. My wife came up with them. Terrible, absolutely vile. I love it so much. You're crawling through a sewer. There's 100-year-old garbage and God knows what else, and you're slicking through it. The guy with strength of 15 had to dislocate his shoulder to fit in the pipe. And you look ahead and you see three robots shooting a wall of flesh, and you're hoping to God that, you know what, maybe if the robots win, they'll probably be easier to kill. And then you got to make a choice. Are you going to walk back through the muck and the muck and guck and poop and everything else? Or are you going to, risk it with a dislocated shoulder, being like, yeah, I can take them. We'll see what happens.
All right, I like it. The visuals you were describing, you've gotten some of those brought to life in the book. We've got an artist from is it Latvia that he's from?
Yeah, Rollins. He's I actually connected with him in 2017. That's when I first had like I guess the first incipients of the idea, but it hadn't yet come to true fruition yet. But I still had him on call as like, hey, I have an idea. And he's like, this is cool. I'll stick with you. And his art's really developed in the years. And a lot of the art he's done, he's like, I want to redo it. I want it to look better. I'm like, absolutely, dude. Whatever you feel is appropriate.
So when you sit down so you said that this has been germinating in the mind for a little while. When you're sitting back, or when you're going through your process, what's your process like? Is it like you're laying in bed at night and you're having a conversation, or you're just daydreaming, and something comes and you got quickly write over like a one-line thing, or do you have more? Because anytime I've tried to, I've not brought anything to publication, and may never do so because I'm terrible at keeping projects going. But anytime I've attempted to, I tend to always start by kind of sketching out a character sheet and then letting the character sheet start to define the mechanics a little bit, or that's how I keep my mechanics in mind. Is like I look at the character sheet and say, okay, this is how derive my mechanics.
Mm.
What's your kind of process through that? Or did you come from like more of the thematic side and then the mechanics filled in afterwards?
I gotta say, I'm more coming from the thematic side. I was gonna say that's a really interesting way of putting together an RPG, starting with a character sheet. I think that's really smart. Too bad I didn't do that at all, and I had to work backwards from there. But no, usually the character sheet's the last thing for me because I want to make sure that the game I'm making is, I want to make sure that the core theme, I suppose, or like what it's going for is concrete. I want to make sure I'm making the right game because if you compare Vampire the Masquerade to something like, hold on, let me look at my shelf back there. If you compare something like Vampire the Masquerade to Shadowrun, like completely different themes, completely different end goals when it comes to design. Like they're nowhere comparable. And so I think it's important to sit down with yourself and be like, okay, what's the focus? What am I trying to do to challenge the players? Is it a narrative experience? Is it a resource experience? Is it a simulationist experience? And I suppose I sat there and I was just like, to quote a Tarkov dev, I know Tarkov isn't exactly the best
yeah,
right now.
there's a dangerous company or a dangerous group to be pulling up right now.
They said as realistic as playable. And I really appreciate that because that's very true. So many games I've played, even one of my guilty pleasure games, like it is realistic. It's got a lot of rules, but at the same time, it gets to a point where you're like, how the fuck do I kill something? And so I want to be able to make something that's like, oh, this is cool. This is challenging in this way, but I'm not going to have people staring over the book for an hour trying to figure out a rule.
So that's actually interesting because I was going to ask, what sort of gamer does this target? So is it targeting the person who's super that's super strategic, or is it the person who really wants to get into a character and role play the character itself and doesn't really care about the mechanics? Is it somebody who's approaching it more from a game or more from like a story? Is it a new person to RPGs altogether, or is it more of a your experienced vet? Like, what sort of a demo are you expecting?
I'm really leaning towards people who are more interested in dungeon crawling and like the more mechanical side of things. Some people throw around the 3-letter acronym of OSR, and it means nothing and everything at the same time.
Yep.
It's very inspired by what Gamma World, what AD&D used to be. It's a dungeon crawler. You manage resources, you try to be smart and strategic. It's not about forging relationships like people think 5e is about. It's about, going on adventure, seeing crazy stuff, and having epic stories that you can tell your friends. If they wanted something more narrative, there's other games like that out there, but this one isn't it. Regarding if newcomers can play it, I think absolutely. I've really tried to make sure the language is as clear and concise as possible so that anyone reading it is like, this is what I do. There's a lot of games that it's like, okay, I need to watch a YouTube video now.
Yeah, I even do that. Like I was speaking with somebody else the other day, and we were talking about learning games, whether it be a board game or whether it be a tabletop game. And I do that with almost every game, regardless. I'll sit down and especially with board games. Our house is a big board game house, and I will get a board game, and before I even open up the rule book, I'll often just go and watch like a 5-minute video of how to play it, and then I go back and I review the rule book to see how accurate either the video was or if I didn't understand something. But yeah, it's interesting how much of a learning tool that is now.
Yeah.
Is that something that you guys are planning on doing, like putting out videos of like character creation or examples of combat or anything like that?
I think it's a good idea in the future. I mean, my main focus right now is
getting it done. I assume.
Getting it done, building the content. I mean, a lot of the content's there. I want to say it's like the player's guide 100% done, the overseer's guide 75-80% done. It's all about transferring it to InDesign, making it look sexy, filling out the art, whatever. But like the content is there. What is left is organizing and then printing costs. But regarding videos, I don't think that's a bad idea. I do have a spattering of skill when it comes to using video software, like recording and editing and doing all that stuff. So it's something that's definitely feasible. But I feel like that's after things are set in stone kind of thing. While people are waiting for it to ship, it's like, oh, by the way, just heads up, this is what you can do.
So when we talk the mechanics of it, it's described. It's a roll under system for folks who don't know, and you've got an AP point system. Can you kind of describe what the AP point system is, and maybe why you chose roll under over what in most systems now people aim for roll over. I personally prefer roll under. I'm deep into a roll under game right now that I've been kind of obsessing about for the last week. But yeah, those two choices and what AP points are, I guess.
Well, I'm glad you're a man of culture that has chosen the correct system. But AP points very much inspired by Wasteland and Fallout. I really like how the action economy is built around you have a certain amount of points, actions cost points, mix and match, have fun, do whatever you want. And I mentioned this in a previous interview I had on Sunday, which was like Pathfinder Second Edition has the whole 3 action economy, but it's like, oh, if you attack once, it's fine, but the second attack is -5 and the third attack's -7. And yeah, I get it, but also that's stupid. Because if someone wants to just lay waste, let them do it. So that's kind of the action points are built around freedom in that regard. If you want to just dump a magazine and that's your turn, do it. Have fun. If you want to run up and lay waste to someone, hell yeah. If you want to spend it running away and letting everyone else die, I think that's an excellent idea too. It's all about, I want to add freedom and a dynamic way to make people be like, okay, I can do planning the route in your head. It also gives something to do, get something people to do while they're waiting for their turn. If people use individual initiative. Regarding the system, I like systems that make the players think instead of just giving it to the DM and the DM's like, you got to hit this number and they roll. With a roll under system, you roll and it's either you look at the DM, you say it's either a pass or it's a fail. That makes the DM's life so much easier. I pass. Sweet. This is what happens. Or a crit. And I'm like, hell yeah. It's all about just ease of transfer of knowledge. I think it's smart personally. I may be biased on that. It's just, it makes the DM's life easier and it helps the players understand what's happening and what the chances are for success instead of saying, I need to hit this number. Let me do, advanced calculus to figure out what my bonus is.
So when have you done much playtesting with it at all?
Yes, I have done playtesting. I playtested at Breakout in Toronto, which went well. It was an adventure for 3 people as they tried to get the remnants of the 7th Star Wars movie to an aged and dying off-brand George Lucas. They succeeded. This was also the 7th Star Wars movie as George Lucas intended, which was midichlorians and the microscopic world. It was totally not worth it. They were paid in paper money, and they're like, wow, this is worthless. Great adventure. I might make it like, a 1-page adventure. Just, I like things being stupid and fun to juxtapose the absolute horrors that will be contained within the book.
So when you go through playtesting for a game over the time, like not so much at the end, but over the whole period of time, whenever you're getting the concept and you're just kind of developing the rules, what's been kind of like the most thing that after it was mentioned to you, after you've gone through a playtest and somebody went, hey, this didn't work or that didn't work, what was kind of like the most like, well, duh, why didn't I think of that before type thing that you've had?
Oh, you know what? There is something like that, and I'm blanking on it right now. I swear it happened, and I was just like, oh, duh, like obviously. I think it was it was hitting multiple opponents with bullets, because I was just like, if you're holding down a trigger, you're not going to just point it at one person. And I was just like, oh, obviously, so that combat doesn't take forever. That was just my like obvious moment. It's maybe a bit niche, but like that was a telling feature. Another thing was for playtesting, something I find really crucial and important is I will give my wife the character sheet, and I will say, I want to see how long it'll take you to make a character. and how easy it is for her to make a character, because she's not by any means a person in the hobby. She is not a big fan of RPGs simply because she just doesn't enjoy it like I do. Just fine. But like, I give her I say, make a character. And if she's confused about parts, I'm like, yeah, that's something that needs to be changed. That needs to be, nipped and tucked and plucked and moved around. And it's really informed my design on how to make it seamless. Like, you read from one cover to the other and you're like, I move forward. That is how I make a character.
Right. So one of the things I've always found interesting is watching. So I just got back from a con out on the far east, like an hour or two east of Toronto, small con, and there's a couple of creators there that were playtesting their games, and it's really interesting watching a creator playtest it as the player and having somebody else run it. So have you had the opportunity to be a player in the game that you've made, or have you always?
I have not yet. No. That is definitely something that I'd like to experience. Although I will be completely honest, I am a forever DM by choice. I do have control issues, and I'm well aware of that. But I would love to see how someone else takes what I've built and runs it, and how I would fare actually playing in the world that I've created. So I think that's a really interesting take. I think it's surreal, I suppose.
Yeah, I think you have to have a certain amount of discipline to be able to bite the tongue on certain things, because there's never been a game that survived first contact with somebody else that they didn't do something incorrect, right? Like one of the games, like I mentioned earlier, that I've been kind of diving into a little bit is Dragonbane. It's a Swedish game that's
I know Dragonbane. Yeah, great.
Yeah, a lot of fun. I just found it recently. I hadn't really been paying attention, and it's stumbled across it. I was like, oh, that's really cool. And so I was like trying to go through, making sure I had everything down pretty good, because I wouldn't mind running this at some conventions next fall. And I was like, well, maybe the best way to do this would be just to record a demo thing, put it up, and then basically nerd snipe and let everybody go, hey, you got all this stuff wrong. And be like, thank you. That's exactly what I was looking for. I didn't really. But
well, funny enough, I kind of tried to do that. I printed a pre-release, 300 copies of like a 0th edition that I put out into the world, which you've probably seen. And I wanted it, A, to like see what people thought, if it sell, whatever, and B, I wanted blind playtests where I'm not at the table, but I want people to take it and be like, okay, let me decipher these rules, and then come back and say, hey, by the way, this rule is stupid. And if they do, I'm like, oh, I think so too. That's a fair point. Let me, think on it. So I tried to do that in order to, play test without being directly involved in the play test while I was, working on other stuff and, getting the thing off the ground. It worked to a degree, mostly because probably a lot of people bought it and then put it in their library, and it's going to sit there forever. So
I'm guilty of that too. I've got a ton of games here that are sitting there unplayed, that I justify it with saying, well, I pull them off the shelf every once in a while, flip through them, and get an inspiration for something in the other game that I am playing in.
Oh, so, isn't that the worst?
That's what I handle. Like, I've got games up here that have amazing things in them, like World Without Numbers. All the Without Numbers games.
Loves World Without
There's
Numbers.
so much amazing material in those books. I don't play the games though. I'm not a fan of Kevin's kind of remix of BX, but the content that he puts into games, as far as like ideas and tools, are amazing. I highly recommend them for that. It's just not the game that I want to play. It's not the mechanics I like. So yeah, those are kind of books that'll sit on my shelf forever. They won't get played, but they'll get used.
True. I mean, I'm guilty of having a few like that. Like I call them collector's items, because it's like, will I find someone who wants to play this? No. Do I think it's amazing? Absolutely.
So when you're going down to the local game stores, or if you're going to any of the local cons, or if you're just kind of playing with people or trying to get people to play with outside of your core groups, how big of a difficulty do you find it to get people interested into non-fantasy role-playing games? Like, how once you get them sold on it, I'm sure it's fine to sit down and play the game. But how is that initial, hey, let's go play this other type of game that's completely different than what you've done before?
Oh, man,
how's that hurdle?
it is a tough hurdle. I've had a total of 3 groups at the cafe where I run. Two of them are active. All of them, actually, okay, 2 of them started with, it's like, okay, everyone wants to play 5e. Fuck, I'll bite the bullet. Whatever. The first one I actually ran 5e, but I supplanted a lot of the rules with Morkborg, which got very fun when I started being like, oh, you open a cursed book, reroll all your stats, and they were like, oh my god, we played 5e-esque, and then afterwards, I can't remember what we played afterwards, but I was just like, hey, I want to try this, and people are like, yeah, you know what, sure, we're having fun here with the DM, so let's try another game, and we played a lot of weird different games. The second group I had, we immediately started with Hunter the Vigil. I was like, I want to run Hunter the Vigil. They're like, I don't know what this is, but I'm down. And I was just like, wow, this is a great gaming group. And then the third group, everyone and their mother wanted to play 5e. And I did something real mean. The creator of The Walking Dead, I can't remember his name for the life of me.
You mean like the comic creator?
Yeah, the comic creator.
Okay, yeah. Now yeah. I had it whenever before I said comic creator, and then as soon as you went, it fell off my tongue. But I know who you're talking about. Yes. Anyway, sorry.
He once said, "How do you succeed in comics? Lie and deceive." Which is a terrible thing to do, but he's right, because I walked into the cafe. I'm like, we're not playing 5e. We're playing AD&D, assholes. I lost 2 players, and I was just like, get rid of them. Fine, go. And I was like, and the rest stayed, and they had a great time. Although they were like, this is survival horror. I'm like, I know what it is. And then after that, now we're playing vampire, and it's great.
The previous items that you've put out, so whether it be the books or the previous Kickstarter or the zines, the size difference between those products and what's on the Kickstarter looks to be quite a bit different, because Kickstarter, you've got, is it 3 books?
It's 2 zines and a hardcover. Yes,
2 zines, a hardcover, and a DM screen.
And a DM screen. It's probably going to be cardstock. One of the future stretch goals, if we make it, is to bump it up. We'll see how that goes, but yeah, it's going to be all that.
So how much of a learning curve, or how much of a kind of a kick in the pants was the process difference between a single zine versus multiple, and what do you kind of foresee as possible things you're gonna have to adjust for moving forward with it?
I guess one of the biggest learning curves had to be with, starting off with like a 40-page little mini game, and then going over to like a 50-page supplement for a game that already exists. Like, the synergy is already there, or like if there is synergy that needs to be made, like you can just scroll up and be like, oh, I need to add this rule. With something this size, it involves a lot of being cognizant of what needs to be covered. Should it be covered? How does it affect the rest of gameplay? How do I make it so this isn't left in the dust? It's a big learning curve, enough that I've like written several like physical paper notes of like, do not forget this stat. And I was just like, yes, I have to. A lot of synergy is the biggest thing to be concerned of when you're making a product like this. You got to make sure that everything jives, makes sense, something isn't forgotten, especially if you're going down the route of like a really in-depth OSR style dungeon crawl. Other than that, it's kind of smooth sailing. You're just making a bigger version of what you made before. As long as the synergy's in place, and as long as you remember, like, the interlocking moving parts, it's like anything else. It's just, again, more of what was before, and you just got to cover and think of like, the first pass of the game, I forgot stealth rules. What if I want to shoot someone in the head? I was like, oh my god, I'm an idiot. How did I forget this? How did I forget that some people might want to creep up and stab someone in the neck? And I had to add that quickly before I printed out the pre-release. It's a lot of backtracking. It's a lot of synergy. It's a lot of backtracking to make sure that you're like, okay, is this playable?
The with the DM screen, what makes a good DM screen for you? Like, and so I tend to, for me, and it's partly because I play typically more BX based games, so I've got the system in my head.
Yeah.
But I've always kind of held I prefer to roll everything out in the open, so I don't use my DM screen really for concealment of anything other than the occasional, like, I'm going to roll your stealth check for you so you don't know what it is.
True.
But outside of that, I don't typically roll behind a screen. Before, as far as reference, how do you determine what pieces of a book are most important for a reference and which aren't? Because if we take the most popular game out there that we've both kind of, neither one of us, I don't think, probably play all that much anymore. But if you take 5e and you look at their DM screens, they are god awful.
Oh, truly.
Like pure garbage on whoever decided of what they're going to put on the DM screen. It's like there's so many other useful things that could be put there. But how do you go about choosing what would go on there?
I think charts are a guy's best friend when it comes to DM screen. I think that. I feel like a DM screen needs to be there for either rules that, not rules you're going to see all the time. Like, how do I say this? You got to find the right balance for rules that are kind of niche, and it's just like, I will need to quick reference this if this ever comes up, as well as rules that are like, this is something that is used all the time. So like on the DM screen I'm making is like, you need the basic combat charts for like, this is how to use a gun properly. This is the general gist of like combat, step 1, 2, 3, 4. You want to make it small but legible and understandable, but at the same time, rules that might not come up all the time, like bartering. There's barter rules. You need that as well, because like the last thing you need to do is someone's just like, I want to sell this, and you're like, I gotta flip the book now. You just honestly just put the math on there. Just put the math on the DM screen. Everything else you can look up later, or you should have read it before the session. But if you're in the midst of something that's like, not life or death, but like it's a more fast pace, like you need to have this stuff available. And so I just think like, important charts are number one when it comes to being put on a DM screen. And then everything else is, bonus, I suppose.
You mentioned earlier on in the conversation about trying to kind of decloak some of this and remove some of the mystery, or be able to help out folks that are getting into this whole space. Mm-hmm. When you approach into Kickstarters, and everybody who I've spoken to, whether it be Gavin Norman when he's bringing OSE out, or somebody with their very first zine for Zine Quest, every one of them seems to have, one of the first things they say is, I couldn't have done this had I not spoken to person X. They have almost like a Kickstarter mentor. And it's like, there's this weird domino of like, one person does it, then they go and help 3 other people, and it spreads out. So did you have a Kickstarter mentor that helped you out? And if so, what kind of like big lessons did they give you to navigate it? Obviously it's not your first Kickstarter, but in general for that.
So the same person that's helping me with this Kickstarter helped me with my first. She is Violet Ballard of RV Games, based in California. She is my distributor for most of my works, all of my works. She is a absolute wealth of knowledge. Phenomenal person. The best advice she's given me is all about development bloat. And not just like the written word or rules. It's all about like the little things that Kickstarters promise, like get a commemorative coin if you back within the first 24 hours. Like, she's an absolute wealth of knowledge, where she's just like, here's a list of things. Do not put this on the Kickstarter, or this is going to push us back like 9 months. And I'm like, understood. She understands marketing really well. She has a great fan base. She's probably the most efficient distributor I've ever seen. My first Kickstarter was a month early from our expected date. The only time that will happen ever. So I want to give her all the praise for helping me understand how to distribute, how to, even make a Kickstarter look good, what it should include. She's been a wealth of knowledge, and I could not have done any of this without her and her sage advice.
So taking all the information she's giving you and distilled it down, you've got somebody coming up saying, hey, they want to do their first zine. They're starting small. They want to do a zine like you had done in the past. Mm-hmm. Is there, besides the process of creating the zine and all of that, which we'll assume that person has gotten. But as far as the actual Kickstarter itself, what's the number one don't do this and number one do this? Would you say that you've got out there for that?
For don't do this, the best thing I can say is keep a small nut, which is do not overpromise. Don't say this is cool, I want to make this, because you could write whatever you want. You could dream up whatever you want. The problem is you got to make it real. And so if you're promising cardboard cutouts, if you're promising a whole card deck, if you're promising like a quadrifold GM screen that doubles as a dust cover for the book, you got to source this. You got to find people that can make this. These are custom jobs. It's expensive. You got to ship it. It's exhausting. Just be smart, understand what you want to print, and make sure that it can be printed and shipped out quickly and efficiently and with high quality. Or do this, make sure that the spotlight is on the actual product. I mean, I can't tell you how many Kickstarters I've backed a lot. I've backed a lot of Kickstarters that looked promising or seemed cool. I can't tell you how many I've seen and passed over because the person's like, I've been working on this since I was 15 years old. Or something along the lines of like, oh, it draws inspiration from all this and it's got sexy ass graphics. No mention of a system. Absolutely none. So if you want to make a Kickstarter, make sure it's clear, it's transparent. Whoever's backing it understands what they're getting, even from the minutia of like, what the hell dice am I going to be rolling to resolve things? You got to know it, and you got to show people that they're buying a game. They're not buying an art book. They're not buying like a prop for their shelf. They're buying something to be played.
So you mentioned shipping, and we both live in Canada, so we're both very well aware of anything that crosses that imaginary line between Canada and Canada's pants, that the price goes astronomical of getting anything through, and it's also true, I'm sure, of leaving the continent and heading anywhere else in the world.
Yeah.
How big of a problem is that? Is that something where I've seen some Kickstarters have decided, hey, we're going to bundle the price of shipping in, and which to me feels like a mistake, because then that may or may not be the reality of time whenever you go to ship, or adding the shipping obviously after the Kickstarter is closed, or some folks are doing things where they will get something printed on another continent to cut down shipping over there. How is it that you guys are approaching it, and how do you see those challenges? Or if you were to do this another way, how would you approach it?
So one thing that I am very lucky for with how Violet and I have worked out the shipping problem is doing everything manually would be horrifying to do, especially from both my position in Canada and her position in the US. Like, it would just be awful to do it manually. Thankfully, though, there are half decent or just fully decent distributors and what the heck are they called? I guess fulfillers that are throughout the continent. Specifically in Canada, we have Composed Dream Games, who I had the pleasure of meeting at Breakout Con. Wonderful people, absolutely lovely. I bought 7th Sea from them. I hope it's okay. But like getting in contact with people that like their entire business is about moving product from point A to point B is absolutely crucial if you want to keep costs down, because they got the means to make it cheap. They can ship in bulk. They can minimize all the horrible processing fees that comes with, putting every single book in every single box. They have a lot of the overhead done already when it comes to, even just the material needed to ship. When it comes to printing and like getting the books over, it's really important to shop around and find a decent price while factoring in the fact that it has to go from a factory to your front door. I believe currently we're looking at Panda, who is based out of America/China. Their printing rates are good and their shipping rates are actually pretty decent, for a continent away. But I mean, I've also inquired with Impreza in Europe, who their shipping to Canada isn't terrible, actually. Thankfully, if you get enough product, the shipping from their factory to your front door is not as awful as you imagine. It truly isn't, especially depending on where in the world they're situated compared to us. So it's a matter of both shopping around as well as finding the right people to actually move the product, so you aren't racking up costs and ruining everybody's day by saying, hey, it's going to cost $30 to get your book that you paid $100 for.
What's the if you had to look at, you said you've backed a lot of Kickstarters,
Mhm.
and I can see several games behind you. If you had to pick a company or a particular product, but let's say a company for now, that's done it really, really well in terms of, hey, these guys put out high quality books, they keep the costs well, I got it when I expected it to, etc. Is there somebody that you kind of look at and go, that's what I want to hit in terms of, like, that's the watermark I want? Or if not that, then I guess of the current RPG space, which companies do you think are doing it the best? Like, who's the gold standard right now in the tabletop space?
I got two answers for that. For consistent content, clarity, and fulfillment, it's got to go to Free League. They can't be matched. Every single thing I've bought from them has been a banger. I cannot understate that.
I'm kind of in the same boat. I don't understand how they can put box sets together as well as they do.
No, like even Blade Runner, I was like, you know what, the book looks cool, but I'm skeptical. I read through it, I'm like, wow, this is great. I thought it'd be, every single time they put something out, there's a part of me, there's a little thing in the back of my brain that's like, this seems like it's going to be a mediocre tie-in video game style thing. It's always good. The themes are phenomenal. The gameplay is great. It's designed perfectly, like high quality shit, and everything they make in their Kickstarter is like, wow, this is a lot of stuff. This is excellent. I'm a sucker for Tales from the Loop and stuff like that. I really want to run Twilight 2000. I think it's phenomenal. Another company, fulfillment was decent, as you can expect, but content wise, Arc Dream keeps putting out Pulitzer level work. I am so excited. I just finished a campaign of Impossible Landscapes. My players do not trust me anymore after I gaslit them for 8 sessions in a row. I really want to run God's Teeth. I need to find the right group for that. But I read it. I'm like, this is art. This is the best piece of fiction I've read in like a good 5 years.
That's actually an interesting comment you just made. This is art. When you look at books, and you mentioned Morkborg earlier in terms of like as far as a game, when you look at a book design, and this is fresh in my head just because I had a conversation with a gentleman, if you know Monkey Blood Designs, of the Midlands fame. I was speaking with Glenn, but we were having a discussion about what makes a layout useful or artistic. So is it when I look at Morkborg, for example, that's a game I bounce off of because I look at that rule book and I'm like, I can see that there's amazing art there. I'm not going to sit and try to decipher the game out of that because it's just not going to happen for me. But at what point do you find the design and readability, or design and like I guess I tend to, for me that would be a great setting book, but it's a terrible rule book because for me I want rule books to be more like technical manuals. But that's my opinion. But how do you view it?
I view it as I think some books are great art books, some books are great rule books. Whether the game within is good or not is completely subjective as well. But I think that there always needs to be a line towed on, a perfect balance between the two. Because eventually, like everything in this hobby, eventually it's going to have to be played. And the last thing you want to do is be like, okay, it's now upside down. Now I can read it. I mean, I'll be honest, with Morkborg, it took me a good 5 minutes to decipher the purple text that said Arcane Catastrophes with how it was broken up, and I was like, God damn, man. Still fun because it's just, the art lends itself to the vibes and the theme of the game, which is important. But again, I think it's a bit much when it comes to like, I need a quick reference to some of the rules. Thankfully, Johan did, think ahead and put all the rules in the front cover. So you can just open up the front of the book and there's literally everything you need to know how to play.
Yeah.
Except for like very niche rules. But there has to be a balance or else you're just going to be glazing over it being like, oh my God. Other games I have like that are Hell Knight, which is very much like a splatterpunk-esque grindhouse, like 80s magazine, which I love, and it's about as aesthetically dense, but it's a bit more legible, actually, I would say. And another one I backed recently was Attack from Space, which I can't complain about because it's designed to look like the margins of like a school kid's notebook with like little men, fighting aliens and stuff like that. And it looks like a mess, but they released the hardcover, which is an absolute mess, but they also shipped a zine with the clean rules with no art. And I thought that was really smart so that, I need to actually play the game, pop open the zine, have the rules there.
Yeah. And I think having that document is important too, just for things like, for accessibility reasons. If you want to be able to have something that you can hand over to a screen reader for somebody who's visually impaired, trying to hand over the art book is not going to function. But if you have that clean set of rules, it's a lot easier to produce that.
I mean, my own like Into the Zone was a bit more chaotic than one would assume from a rule book, and I made a plain white text or white page version of it so people can actually read it and decipher the rules. It's important to have, lest you alienate someone, like you said, your eyes just glaze over it. You're like, Jesus. You want to read it, but you don't want to play it.
Yeah. The we were talking about the size of the Canadian tabletop space. Do you have some Canadian folks that you would like to kind of give a shout out to that don't get heard of or that are going up? I've had on here Greg Gillespie of Barrow Maze fame and what have you. But I agree that there are fewer Canadian, and I mean there's fewer Canadians than there are Americans, period. But there's fewer Canadians in the space as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like, who else would you like to kind of shout out?
Well, I went to Brock. Greg Gillespie's definitely a figure.
Yeah, he's polarizing for some. I've never been to one of his classes, so I can't speak to those. But
well, his mazes are good. I'd love to shout out Composed Dream. They're fantastic. They're an absolutely wonderful, husband and wife duo that are putting out this fantastic company of like actually, helping Canadians have access to these games, to this hobby. And honestly, they're more important than any other creator, I imagine. Like, anyone can make. It takes someone to go out of their way and really put their nose to the grindstone to actually like allow it to be accessible, especially with a country as, huge as ours, essentially. Yeah, it's very, I don't want to say sparse, but it's just, it's all over the place. You got BC and then you got miles of empty until Edmonton, and it's like, how the hell are you going to ship across that? So them, I also would like to highlight someone who I'm actually going to be publishing in August, which is JD Clement. He's putting out, have you heard of Hypermall Unlimited Violence?
No, I've not.
I urge you to look at it. It is a RPG inspired by Cruelty Squad. I have my friend Tristan, who's my editor. He said, "This, my friend's making a game. I need you to read it." And I read it. I'm like, if I do not publish this, I am a moron. And immediately upon reading his RPG, I changed my business from development to publishing.
So can you give me the name once more?
Hypermall Unlimited Violence.
Hypermall.
It is.
Violence.
I cannot say anything to do it justice. It's something you have to see to believe.
All right, I'll look into that. If you've got a link, send me the link. I'll put it in the show notes as well.
I'll be happy to. Yes.
So I guess we'll wrap up with a couple of questions here at the end. There's one thing I always ask everybody that I'll ask you here now is I always kind of assume people are like me, and I've discovered they're very much often not. But I'm going to continue to assume that because ego. But if you're anything like me, when you sit down to go have a conversation with somebody, or before you sit down and have that conversation, you run through things in your head of like, oh, this might come up, or that might come up, or what have you. Was there anything before we sat down that you're like, hey, I really hope Kevin asks me about this, or I hope I get a chance to talk about this that I haven't asked yet? And if so, what would it be? Like, what did I not bring up that you're kind of hoping I would have?
So I'm maybe you've heard this before, but the way I operate is I'm a very reactive person. I don't do a lot of forethought, much to my wife's chagrin, where she's just like, don't you think? I'm like, no. But I feel like you've thrown a couple questions at me that I wasn't prepared for, but in a good way. It made me really like delve into the creative process that I had and think a bit more outside of what I was initially doing, less surface level. And I was just like, oh yeah, that's a good way of looking at things. So no, everything that I was possibly expecting, which was again very surface level, went unheeded, and instead we actually delved into genuine, deep, meaningful conversation. So I will say no, and nothing is missed, I don't think.
Awesome. I guess I'll throw a light one before we go to where everybody can find everything from you. Before I throw it to where everybody can find all your stuff, because words are hard. We've mentioned your wife a few times as far as helping out with the editing and being playtest dummy for creating characters and probably just having to put up with the stresses and everything else that goes on with anybody who's involved with this sort of a creation. You said she doesn't get big into tabletop games. What is her juice from it? Besides, obviously, you're happy, so she's happy. But what's her juice on it in terms of like, she's obviously spent a lot of time on this if she's going through it, editing it. What's her, how is she viewing it? Or what's her, if she was to talk to somebody, maybe when you're there or maybe when you're not, what's she saying about this game?
I think I'll have to say a quote from her, where the last time she played an RPG was 2017, and I ran 5th edition Shadowrun, and she liked it because she's just like, she told people, she was just like, I was an orc, I had robot arms, and it was set in Toronto, and that was enough for people to be like, that was pretty cool. And then she got upset at me the other day because she's like, you said it was set in Toronto. I'm like, yeah, the campaign, not the whole game, honey. Like, and she's just like, oh, well, that's what you told me. But I guess with my game, I think she would say it's good because she's biased. Absolutely. And she'd probably tell people, she's just like, it's a Mad Max game. I will mention she was not a big fan of Fury Road, which she's wrong.
I mean, everybody has tastes. It doesn't.
Yeah, and some people's tastes are raw. But she would definitely be like, it's like Mad Max, and that's either people are going to be like, oh, or people are going to be like, eh. So,
all right.
Let's hope she speaks to more people that are like, ooh.
Yeah. All right. So, where can people find the company in general, the Kickstarter itself, or how do they, if they want to reach out and talk to you, how do they get in touch with you, and what's all the ways to get into your ear?
So all the information, if people want to learn more about the game, they can go to hammercitygames.com. I'm in the process of redesigning it. Originally, it was just kind of a splash page to get people into the Kickstarter, but I want to rebuild it as a storefront to showcase publishers, games I've created, games other people have created. That's something that I'm going to be doing during the summer. If they want to follow me and see me be incredibly aggressive towards 5th edition players, they can reach me at Hammer City Games on Twitter, all one word with the @ in front of it. My email is on my website, so if people want to email me directly to yell at me for my dog shit takes about 5th edition, they absolutely can as well.
Those are all filtered. They're filtered to a special mailbox.
Yeah, the one where I'm just like, listen here, you little shit. But yeah, if that's how people want to contact me, Twitter and email is the best way. Please please pledge on the Kickstarter. I would really appreciate it.
Yeah, let's try to get that Kickstarter over and fully funded, and that way you can then spend the next several months stressing about shipping and fulfillment and using the excellent Violet, correct?
Violet, yeah, absolutely wonderful. And also, she will just be like, "Wow, I really." I mean, when we shipped to Europe with Graveyard of the Gods, she's just like, "Went missing." I'm like, "What do you mean it went missing?" She's like, "Shipment went missing," and then a month later, it showed up. So that's basically what it's going to be like. Oh, where's the games? I don't know. It's okay. The ship capsized in a tsunami.
All right. Well, thank you very, very much for coming on. I hope this was fun, and I can't wait to see how the Kickstarter goes. I've read through the Wastelanders Handbook. It looks really cool. The art's cool, and the rules are neat. So definitely go and check it out. Thank you for coming on and having a conversation with me. It was a lot of fun, and I can't wait to see how this all ends up.
Well, thank you. I did have a great time, and I appreciate you having me on.
All right, folks, that's going to wrap up this episode of the Red Caps podcast. I hope you enjoyed, you learned something, and that you are eager to come back for more. www.theredcaps.net has all the links for all the ways to contact me, and please do check the description of this podcast to see all the links for Brendan's work and Hammer City Games and the Kickstarter and everything else. Please do get in contact me. I'd love to hear from you. So thank you very so much for listening. Remember, never let your caps dry out. Stay safe, have fun. We'll talk again soon. Take care.